Stories and Documentary Network.
Long before the rise of Manila as a global port city, there existed a powerful maritime kingdom that ruled the shores of Luzon, Tondo. Once a vibrant hub of trade, diplomacy, and culture, Tondo connected the Philippines to the ancient empires of China, India, and the Malay world. But how did this Tagalog-led civilization thrive, and what led to its dramatic transformation under Spanish rule? For early Tagalog peoples, the origins of Tondo are deeply entwined with mythic narratives and oral traditions that blend genealogy, migration legends, and assertions of divine sanction. One of the most enduring tales tells of a Bornean couple, often named Apon and Dayang Dayang, who navigated the South China Sea in search of new lands. According to these chronicles, deposited through generations of storytellers, the couple arrived at the Pasig Delta and intermarried with local families, thus establishing the ancestral line from which Lakan Dula and other Lakandias would descend. In some variants, the Bornean prince bore the title Raja Sulaiman, signaling early Malayic influence, while his Tagalog consort claimed descent from indigenous chieftains. These legends not only affirm the aristocratic pedigree of Tondo's ruling house, but also underscore the role of intermarriage between seafaring migrants and established village chiefs, in forging alliances and consolidating political authority. Through repeated recitations of chants, genealogical recitals, and ritualistic reenactments, Tondo's subjects preserved a sense of continuity that connected their paramount ruler, the Lakan, to both Indianized polities farther south and earlier indigenous custodians of the Luzon lowlands. Archaeological excavations and linguistic evidence reinforce these oral histories by pointing to tangible indicators of early external contact and Indianization. In the late 1990s, teams working along the riverbanks of Barangay Tondo and adjacent coastal zones unearthed fragments of Chinese celadons and white porcelain dating to as early as the 10th century. These shards, bearing Ming and Song dynasty glazes, signal that Chinese junks anchored near Tondo's docks centuries before the arrival of European navigators. Likewise, potsherds from locally produced earthenware, sometimes bearing intricate incised patterns, reveal a thriving pottery industry that catered to both local consumption and trade. Linguistically, Old Tagalog absorbed a host of loanwords from Sanskrit and Malay. Raja, from Sanskrit Raja, denoted princely rank. Maharlika, from Sanskrit Maharaja, literally great ruler or nobleman, referred to the warrior class, and Kadangian, from Sanskrit Kandhara, meaning merchant guild or aristocratic lineage, pointed to both commercial networks and familial status markers. Even terms for certain religious specialists, like Babaylan, may echo Indic or Austroasiatic roots filtered through Malay intermediaries. Together, these linguistic artifacts suggest that Tondo's elites were conversant with ideas circulating in Indianized polities of Java, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula long before the mid-15th century. Beneath these high-status stratas lay a more decentralized yet interconnected sociopolitical framework rooted in the barangay system. Each barangay, originally a settlement of roughly 30 to 100 households, was led by a datu, a local chieftain whose authority emanated from kinship ties and prowess. As population clusters grew along the Pasig's edge, these datus came to recognize the need for a higher level of coordination, particularly in managing irrigation, coordinating defense against pirate raids, and facilitating trade. Over time, many of these village chiefs swore fealty to a paramount ruler known as the Lakan of Tondo, whose court was situated at the wider freshwater stretch near present-day Binondo. Through carefully arranged marriages, a datu might secure his daughter's hand to the Lakan's younger brother, thus ensuring mutual military support and diplomatic favor. Conversely, the Lakan would dispatch agents to collect tribute, often in the form of rice parcels, woven abaca cloth, or baskets of forest honey, reinforcing a reciprocal bond. As long as the datu acknowledged the Lakan's suzerainty, the paramount ruler provided protection, mediated major disputes, and arranged inter-barangay alliances. Even before the 14th century, Tondo had begun to develop as a thriving trading community, leveraging its riverside location to attract merchants from across maritime Southeast Asia. Although the Pasig Delta comprised a labyrinth of mangrove swamps and tidal flats, its navigable channels allowed moderately sized lancharas and sambuks to penetrate inland, landing at rudimentary docks of bamboo and timber. In exchange for locally produced rice, fishing yields such as fresh hilot, carp, and bangus milkfish, and handcrafted pottery, Tondo's traders bartered with Chinese junks carrying celadons, Vietnamese silks, and Japanese iron tools. Simultaneously, Bornean and Javanese roll or Lankar vessels delivered fragrant spices, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, as well as exotic forest resins prized for incense. Archaeological strata have yielded abalone shells that likely arrived as ballast with Sulu traders, while carved whalebone toggles suggest coastal connections that stretched as far as present-day Mindanao. To accommodate this commerce, a cluster of riverine hamlets, each governed by its own datu, gradually coalesced into a port complex near the mouth of the Pasig. Wooden platforms protruded over the water, serving as marketplaces, often referred to as tarabagan, where native Tagalog middlemen negotiated prices and mediated between foreign merchants and inland producers. This emergent pattern laid the foundation for what would become a more centralized polity under the Lakan's leadership. By the 15th century, Tondo's ruling dynasts, most notably Lakan Dula, had consolidated control over these disparate settlements, transforming them into a coherent kingdom that could rival its neighbor Maynila in both wealth and influence. Lakan Dula, often dated circa 1497 to 1570, inherited not only his father's title, but also a network of subsidiary datus, whose loyalties were cemented through generous distributions of forest goods, public feasts, and strategic marital ties. Under his stewardship, Tondo formalized an internal administration wherein each barangay remitted a portion of its annual rice harvest, measured in standard bamboo baskets, and additional resources such as beeswax, cotton textiles, or rattan strips. These goods were brought to the capital's bamboo palisade, where scribes recorded each datu's quota. In return, the Lakan distributed bronze gongs, iron blades, and gold leaf ornaments as tokens of his favor. Through such mechanisms of tribute collection and redistribution, Lakan Dula ensured that resources flowed toward strategic public works, reinforcing river embankments to prevent seasonal flooding, expanding canoe fleets for defense against Moro raiders, and hosting lavish religious ceremonies at shrines dedicated to Bathala and other deities. Simultaneously, Tondo's economic and political stature elevated it to peer status with the Maynila polity across the Pasig. Whereas Maynila's rulers adopted Malay titles such as Raja, reflecting greater Islamic influence, Tondo's Lakan maintained an explicitly Tagalog orientation, blending Indianized courtly rites with indigenous animistic traditions. Yet these two kingdoms frequently cooperated. They coordinated joint expeditions to deter pirates from Laguna de Bay, shared information about monsoon patterns critical for navigation, and negotiated price-setting agreements to prevent market disruptions. In several recorded accounts, later chronicled by Spanish observers, Tondo's merchants and diplomats journeyed to Brunei, presenting gifts of Philippine girdles, tapis, and bamboo flutes in exchange for formal recognition of Tondo's autonomy. These exchanges underscored a political ecology in which Indianization, Islamization, and local animism coalesced into a unique Tagalog worldview centered on the Lakan's court. At the heart of each household stood the ama, or senior male figure, typically a father, uncle, or grandfather, whose authority extended over both property and ritual obligations. Multi-generational households commonly included children, grandchildren, and sometimes elderly relatives who could no longer contribute labor but were honored as keepers of family lore. Through the ama's stewardship, clan lands, primarily rice paddies formed on the alluvial plains, remained in the same lineage, passed down from one generation to the next. Daughters and sons inherited plots in roughly equal measure, although in practice, elder sons often assumed direct responsibility for irrigation and planting decisions, while daughters managed domestic tasks and helped oversee familial trading activities. In merchant households, particularly those with Chinese ties, matrilineal influence occasionally grew more pronounced, as mothers or maternal aunts directed the negotiation of dowries, stringing together alliances with other commercial families. In such cases, a daughter's marriage might transfer both lineage prestige and trade contacts, reinforcing ties between Tagalog chieftains and Chinese merchants who resided for months at a time near the jetties along the Pasig River. Learning in pre-colonial Tondo did not take place in formal schools, but rather unfolded through oral transmission and apprenticeship. From infancy, children heard their elders recite Tanaza and Dalit, short rhymed poems that conveyed moral lessons, genealogies, and seasonal lore. Boys and girls alike gathered at communal hearth fires to listen as seasoned chanters performed epic chants reminiscent of the hudhud of the northern Ifugao, though local variants prioritized flood myths and heroic exploits of ancestral datas. These narratives instilled both a sense of history and codes of proper behavior, emphasizing bravery, reciprocity, and piety toward Bathala and ancestral spirits. Some elite families also welcomed itinerant Islamic teachers, or ulama, who introduced rudimentary lessons in Arabic, primarily for recording trade transactions or reciting simple prayers. Although widespread Islamic literacy remained limited, a handful of Lakan's advisors reportedly used Arabic numerals to tally tribute deliveries and maintain accounts of rice yields. Simultaneously, Chinese merchants employed Chinese characters to record provocative details. Prices of silk bolts, weight of porcelain jars, and names of Malay traders. Yet most native Tagalogs relied on the Baybayin script for correspondence, scribbling short verses on palm leaves or bamboo slivers, and occasionally using the same script to inscribe love poems or genealogical lists that memorialized clan founders. Old Tagalog functioned as the lingua franca in markets, courts, and fishing villages alike. Its fluidity allowed the seamless borrowing of words from multiple linguistic streams. From Sanskrit emerged terms such as Raja or Kadangyan, often pronounced Raja and Kadangyan, designating noble rank and merchant guild status, respectively. Arabic contributed words like puesto, from Mahabba al-Mahraj, meaning position or post, and kadi, reflecting the presence of Malay traders familiar with Islamic jurisprudence. Meanwhile, Chinese terms like sanglay, referring to the Chinese merchant class, filtered into everyday speech, especially during busy market days when local middlemen negotiated directly with Cantonese-speaking junks. Although the Baybayin script elegantly captured the sounds of Tagalog syllables, it lacked characters for Chinese loanwords. Scribes improvised by combining native syllables, leading to spellings such as sanjie for sangli. Over time, these borrowed lexemes became so entrenched that nobles invoked them in formal proclamations. Huwag magbayad ng sangli buwis, tribute to Chinese wholesalers, nang walang pahintulot ng lakan, emphasizing both the fusion of cultures and the Lakan's ultimate authority. Etir and personal adornment in Tondo signified social rank and conveyed individual achievements. Both men and women wore a baro, a loose, collarless shirt reaching mid-thigh, crafted from hand-woven cotton or abaca fibers. Women wrapped a tapis, or rectangular cloth, around their waist. Its length and decorative motifs, ranging from geometric lines to stylized plant fronds, indicated a family's status and connections. Men typically donned short trousers called kampilan, tied at the waist with a simple sash, reserving elaborate apsap or small cloaks for ceremonies. Among the majinu class, jewelry played a particularly conspicuous role. Gold earrings with drop pendants dangled from pierced lobes, while spiral armlets, kandit, and coiled anklets, patik, glinted in the sunlight. Artisans fashioned these ornaments using beaten gold sheets, often inlaid with agate or carnelian beads imported through Bornean networks. Tattooing, known locally as batok, served as both rite of passage and status symbol. Warriors displayed markings of concentric circles on their biceps, signifying acts of valor in battle, while successful traders sometimes adopted more delicate geometric patterns on their forearms to advertise their overseas connections. Both men and women occasionally tattooed small anchor motifs near their shins, symbolizing their dependence on riverine life for sustenance. Marshy floodplains and higher ridges. The typical dwelling, known today as a bahay kubo, rested on sturdy bamboo stilts above the muddy soil, elevating living spaces above seasonal floods. Its walls, woven from split bamboo slats, and its roof, thatched with nipa palm, provided both ventilation and protection from tropical downpours. A narrow ladder led to an open veranda where families slept on raised bamboo platforms, cushioning nightly rest with mats woven from pandan leaves. Larger households sometimes combined 2 or 3 units into clusters, forming compounds where extended kin resided side by side. Beyond the immediate dwelling, communal areas emerged. A cleared patch in front of the house served as a makeshift plaza for small markets, children's games, or midday socializing. Across a short distance, multiple barangay dwellings clustered around a central space, shaded by mahogany or nara trees, where periodic gatherings took place. Negotiations over rice distribution, conflict mediation by the datu, or performances by visiting babaylan dancers. While most villages remained unfortified, certain strategic hamlets near river mouths constructed rudimentary kuta, fortified enclosures of sharpened bamboo pilings and elevated watchtowers designed to resist Moro raids. These kuta, though modest, stored woven mats, rice sacks, and spears in anticipation of sudden attacks during monsoon months when traveling couriers and merchant ships could not reach the capital. Rice loomed large, served boiled or steamed in woven baskets lined with banana leaves. It formed the foundation of nearly every meal. Root crops such as kamote, sweet potato, and gabi, taro, supplemented rice during lean seasons or extended family feasts, while bananas and coconuts offered quick sources of vitamins and hydration. Along the Pasig River and its estuaries, fishermen cast nets for hilot, carp, bangus, milkfish, and mud crabs, which farmers and artisans bought fresh each dawn at floating barges. Shellfish, oysters, mussels, and small clams lured foraging families to riverbanks during low tide, where they pried open mollusks with sharpened pieces of bamboo. Domesticated animals, pigs, chickens, and occasionally ducks, provided preferred sources of protein for special occasions, slaughtered and roasted over smoldering coals during weddings or harvest celebrations. In the kitchen, cooks combined fish or pork with coconut milk, gata, aromatics such as luya, ginger, and tanglad, lemongrass, and the pungent taste of fermented fish paste, bagung, to create savory stews eaten atop rice. Vinegar siuka, derived from fermented rice or sugarcane sap, served as both condiment and preservative, a staple in marinades for dried fish, tuyo, and pickled vegetables. Dishes like pinakbet, an assortment of local vegetables seasoned with bagung, first appeared in agrarian communities but soon became common fare along Tondo's bustling markets. At the close of each harvest cycle, villages held pagdiriwang, Thanksgiving ceremonies that featured communal feasts, offerings to Bathala, and ritual dances choreographed by the babaylan. These extravagant events, spanning several days, involved sacrifices of chickens or goats, whose blood was offered at stone altars to ensure the next planting season's fertility. During such festivals, corpulent clay jars of palm wine circulated among villagers. Lubricating spirited gamelan, inspired music played on a set of small bronze gongs known as kulintang. Court ceremonies, by contrast, were grander in scale. The enthronement of a new lakan involved a formal procession from the nipa-thatched mayari, royal pavilion, to a nearby hillock revered as an ancestral site. There, the Lakan received a gold-studded headdress and binding cord symbolizing his pact with the spirits and subordinate datus. Royal weddings cemented political alliances, drawing dignitaries from neighboring polities, Pampanga, Bulacan, and even distant Brunei, who exchanged textiles, gold trinkets, and red-burning candles as tokens of goodwill. In a similarly dramatic fashion, the blood compact, Sandugo, signified an unbreakable bond between Tondo's Lakan and a visiting ruler or foreign envoy. Each side made a small cut on their arm, allowing blood drops to mingle in a shared cup of wine, thereby cementing mutual trust under the watchful eyes of the babaylan and seasoned warriors. Boat races, held during the ebb of the dry season, pitted slim canoes manned by young warriors against each other in a test of strength, endurance, and teamwork. Victors claimed cash prizes of rice and fabric and earned renown in local chronicles. Cockfighting, sabong, captivated men from all social strata. Prized roosters, often greased in oil and adorned with small metal spurs, clashed within bamboo arenas while gamblers placed wagers of gold dust, beads, and even rare porcelain shards. Archery contests allowed youths, many trained from adolescence, to showcase accuracy and control, essential skills for hunting game in the nearby marshlands and forests. Hunting parties convened during the waning months of the dry season, as men set snares for deer and wild boar in the hinterlands, returning at dusk with spoils shared among participants and contributing to the communal feast. In evenings, families gathered around flickering fires as elders recited epic chants under the glow of oil lamps. Children imitated rhythmic handclaps on gourds, and traders discussed the day's bargain prices for silk lengths imported from Java or Borneo. With the arrival of Miguel López de Legazpi in May 1564, Tondo's centuries-old equilibrium was abruptly thrust into a new era of foreign domination. Sailing northward from Iloilo under orders from King Philip II of Spain, Legazpi first made landfall at Cebu in April 1565 before dispatching envoys and vessels to explore Luzon's coast. By late 1564, news of Spanish ships in nearby islands reached the ears of Raja Matanda of Maynila and Lakan Dula of Tondo, who dispatched emissaries bearing tribute, rice, coconut oil, and woven textiles as tokens of their willingness to negotiate. Legazpi's envoys assessed both polities, noting the elaborate courts where nobles swapped ceremonial gifts and sat on bamboo-woven benches. The two chiefdoms, while neighboring each other across the Pasig River, maintained distinct identities. Maynila's rulers upheld Malay Islamic courtesies by sending small bands of armed retainers clad in embroidered Campilan-style vests, whereas Tondo's Lakans wore indigenous gold filigreed earrings and adorned their shoulders with feathered cloaks. Recognizing the advantage of local alliances, Legazpi orchestrated a series of sandugo, or blood compact ceremonies in early 1565, wherein he and each ruler made small cuts on their arms, mingled drops of their blood in a cup of palm wine, and drank together in solemn pledge. These rituals, documented by Spanish chroniclers such as Fray Gaspar de San Agustin, enshrined Legazpi as Commander sa Baybayin, commander of the shore, and formally integrated the Lakandias of Tondo and Maynila into a nascent network of Spanish patronage. Following these blood compacts, the Spanish crown granted Legazpi authority to restructure local governance under the encomienda system. Tondo's extensive rice terraces and fertile lowlands, once under direct control of the Lakan's court, now fell under the jurisdiction of Spanish encomenderos, men to whom the crown entrusted land and labor in exchange for tribute and evangelization. Lakan Dula, whose reign had extended from the late 15th century until his death around 1570, negotiated a role as principalia, a Spanish-recognized noble, thus retaining a measure of influence but now operating under the formal oversight of colonial officials. In exchange for acknowledging Spanish suzerainty, Lakan Dula and his immediate relatives received exemptions from forced labor, permission to maintain personal armed guards, and limited jurisdiction over civil disputes among indigenous populations. Yet beneath these concessions lay a broader transfer of power. Whereas Tondo's leaders once coordinated rice quotas and military alliances autonomously, by 1566, they answered to Spanish alcaldes who audited harvest records and enforced new colonial policies. The formal establishment of Ciudad de Manila on June 24, 1571, marked a decisive shift in regional power dynamics. Legazpi chose the site of the former Maynila polity for its defensible hills and natural harbor, naming it both in honor of Spain's patron saint and to symbolize Spanish sovereignty. With the founding of Intramuros, the walled city, on the ruins of Maynila's wooden palisades, the Spanish relocated the political center of Luzon. Tondo, once a peer in prestige, found itself relegated to a colonial barrio on Intramuros's northern perimeter. Over the following years, Spanish administrators gradually divvied Tondo's expansive domains into smaller parcels, some converted into haciendas cultivated by encomenderos, others allotted to the church for missionary purposes. The Lakan's court, once a bustling hub of diplomatic receptions and tribute fairs, shrank as clay-lined ponds gave way to fields of introduced crops such as maize and cacao. By 1573, surviving records indicate that Tondo's native datas paid tribute directly to a Spanish corregidor residing within the nascent capital, reflecting the loss of political autonomy that had defined the pre-colonial era. Parallel to the reorganization of landholdings, missionary zeal swept through Tondo as Franciscan, Augustinian, and Jesuit friars vied to baptize its inhabitants. In 1572, The Augustinians founded the parish church of San Agustin de Tondo on a site once occupied by an Anito shrine near present-day Santa Cruz district. Baptismal registers from this period record the names of hundreds of Tondo residents receiving Christian names, transforming Datu Salalila into Don Salazar and Bituin into Maria de la Cruz. Missionaries adapted indigenous customs to facilitate conversion. They designated local fiestas, originally harvest celebrations honoring Bathala and Anitos, as feast days for patron saints. Thus, the annual Thanksgiving rituals evolved into fiestas in honor of Saint Augustine, where palm leaf hats replaced bamboo garlands, but motifs of rice offerings and communal feasts endured. Yet beneath this veneer of syncretism, indigenous beliefs persisted. Spanish chroniclers marveled at villagers who burned codified incense before morning prayers to Saint Joseph, but then, at dusk, whispered petitions to ancestral spirits at the riverbank. This dual veneration exemplified Tondo's gradual yet complex Christianization. While the cross supplanted certain indigenous symbols, many Tagalogs continued animistic practices alongside formal Catholic rites. By the early 17th century, the Kingdom of Tondo's once resounding voice had grown faint beneath the weight of colonial transformation. The title of Lakan, which had conferred sovereign status and sacred legitimacy for generations, gradually lost its authority as Spanish administrators reorganized local governance. Following the death of Lakan Dula in 1575, Spanish officials refrained from appointing a new paramount ruler. Instead, they co-opted existing elites into colonial offices. Former Datos and Mejinu families were granted positions as gobernadorcillos or cabezas de barangay, answerable not to ancestral precedent, but to the alcaides and corregidores appointed by the crown. In this manner, the Lakan title, once the linchpin of Tondo's socio-political hierarchy, was effectively abolished, replaced by a bureaucracy that tied local leaders directly to Madrid's colonial system. Without a unifying native authority, Tondo's territory splintered. Its fertile riverbanks parceled out among Spanish encomenderos, friar estates, and the newly delineated barrios that radiated from Intramuros. The land that had fed the Lakan's court now fell under disparate jurisdictions, severing the ties that had linked barangay communities to a single locus of power. By the 19th century, as Filipino nationalist thought gained momentum, historians such as Teodoro Agoncillo and earlier qualifiers like José Rizal began reclaiming Tondo's legacy from the depths of colonial historiography. In academic treatises and public lectures, they framed Lakan Dula not as a subdued vassal under the encomienda, but as a sovereign whose alliance with Legazpi represented a diplomatic maneuver rather than outright submission. Through such reinterpretations, Tondo became emblematic of indigenous resilience, a political actor that negotiated with foreign powers on its own terms, however constrained. Commemorations of Lakan Dula, once muted under Spanish rule, surfaced in historical novels, civic pageants, and eventually in the naming of streets and schools. In 1924, Manila's City Council inaugurated a monument to Lakan Dula on P. Burgos Street, casting him as a prescient leader whose legacy legitimized emergent nationalist aspirations. At the same time, scholarly excavations in 2007 and subsequent years began uncovering pre-colonial burial sites and artifacts in the Tondo foreshore area. Archaeologists exhumed cremated human remains interred alongside glass beads, iron knives, and Chinese ceramics, tangible evidence of early trade networks and social stratification. These findings, displayed in the Tondo Archaeological Sites Museum, sparked renewed interest in pre-Hispanic Tagalog civilization, challenging prevailing narratives that relegated Tondo to a footnote in colonial chronicles. Yet for all its storied past, contemporary Tondo faces profound challenges. One of Metro Manila's most densely populated districts, home to hundreds of thousands of residents living in cramped alleyways and informal settlements, Tondo grapples with poverty, overcrowding, and limited access to basic services. Narrow streets that once accommodated trading canoes now host sari-sari stores, street vendors, and heavy traffic, leaving little visible trace of the stilt houses that once lined the tidal flats. Nonetheless, grassroots organizations and local historians continue to champion heritage conservation, salvaging fragments of pottery from construction sites and cataloging oral histories from elders who recall ancestral shrines along the riverside.